Hello everyone, I'm going to talk about the English literature optional in this lecture series, and I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of both WBCS as well as UPSC. I've begun with the very basics because I know that information on this optional is very rare in the market. I secured the third rank in the WBCS Executive Examination 2017 with this optional, and that is contrary to many views and opinions in the market that English literature is not a scoring optional, or that it's not a it's not a very popular optional. Well, I agree that while as an optional paper it's very rare, but that does not mean that it is not scoring. All optional papers have a level playing field if you have prepared well enough for them. And let me tell you that I was asked this question in my interview as well. They asked me whether whether I thought that English literature was a scoring optional, and I told them that I believed that if I did well, I could turn it into a scoring paper. And then they asked me whether I had done well or not. And I said I believed that I had done well. So, and my background, as you can see, right from the beginning, as I've studied English literature, I graduated with a degree in English literature from St. Stephen's College. Thereafter, I went on to do an MA and also an MPhil in English from the University of Delhi. So there is no way that I could have chosen any other optional. So on that note, who all can choose this as an optional paper? Now, frankly speaking, preferably those who have at least a graduation degree in English, those are the people who should go for this optional, because the syllabus demands graduation degree knowledge. And if you are not a graduate in English literature, or you don't have any such degree, then you need to be someone who is otherwise deeply interested in the subject, and not just interested as a hobby, but would have the ability to analyze texts critically. So you need to look at literature not just as stories, not just as fiction, but you need to be able to analyze it from the different literary, critical, theoretical perspectives which are very much a part of literature. And why I'm not discouraging those who did not have a graduation degree from taking up this as an optional, but then if you have an English literature background, then it helps because your basics are clear, your foundation is already made. You don't have to build it from scratch when you study it as an optional. And really, when you look at the questions, when you look at the syllabus, you need to have a strong foundation. Otherwise, it's difficult to prepare this as an optional in, say, 4 or 5 months or so, or even more. Then it would require you more time to prepare for this. Now let's look at the syllabus. See, for WBCS, and here I'm discussing certain generic questions. In WBCS, in both the papers, paper 1 and 2, in section A, candidates will have to write an essay on a literary topic. And in section A in paper 2, candidates would have to critically analyze or respond to an unseen passage, either in prose or in verse. Okay. And the idea of starting with these two sections is that these are compulsory. There's no way you can, get your way around these questions. You have to attempt them. Similarly, in UPSC, there are such questions, but before that, how are the papers divided? They're divided according to the time periods in literature, and paper 1 deals with texts from 1600 to 1900, whereas paper 2 is just from 1900 to 1990. So essentially modernism and postmodernism, a bit of contemporary literature in the second paper, whereas the first paper would cover texts from Elizabethan period, from the Romantic period, as also from the Victorian period. And let me tell you that this is also roughly the division in WBCS also. Okay, and these topics and movements, this is a list that has been provided to you by UPSC, and you need to have a thorough knowledge of all these movements, and that's expected of any student of literature. And while WBCS has not specifically asked you to have a knowledge of these movements, you can imagine that if you especially have to attempt the first question that you saw in section A of the first paper, you need to have a sound knowledge of literary topics and movements, these general background topics, that is Renaissance, Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, metaphysical poetry, epic and mock epic. See, without knowing what an epic is and what a mock epic is, without knowing how metaphysical poetry arose, you'll never be able to understand what John Donne is writing about. You'll not know the perspectives from which Shakespeare has written his plays if you don't understand the context of Elizabethan and Jacobean drama. And so on and so forth. You can pause this video and note down the topics in details. Now, what are the texts for the other sections? So, there are texts which you have to study in details, and let me tell you here that I got a lot of requests about which books to study for English literature optional and so on. See, there are no guidebooks or question books per se, and I would not suggest that you go and read guidebooks at all, considering that this is a literature paper. You have to read the texts that have been prescribed in the syllabus. So, for instance, if Macbeth and As You Like It have been prescribed for Shakespeare in WBCS, you read the entire play. You read the entire play of Macbeth. You make your own notes from a critical perspective. Okay, and perhaps before reading Macbeth, what you do is you go and read a background of Jacobean drama and Shakespeare's tragedies and Aristotelian tragedies. Alright, and after reading the play, you read a few critical essays, a good source for which is JSTOR. Oh, but then if you don't have an institutional affiliation, you wouldn't be able to access JSTOR. Nonetheless, there are several other websites available online, and where you can access critical essays. Okay, so that's what you do. You read a background. Okay, you read the play, make your own notes, go to the critical essays, make notes from them as well, because you're not supposed to read and remember the whole critical essay at all. Then you collate all your material, come to a conclusion as to the main themes in the play, right? And then you revise it. You keep revising your notes. So I would never recommend guidebooks for the optional paper here. Okay, what you can do is buy previous year's question papers in case of both WBCS and UPSC, and once you've revised a text, just practice writing according to the questions that were asked in previous years. Okay, so here is the detailed syllabus. As you can see, Christopher Marlowe's Edward II is there only in WBCS, no texts by Marlowe in UPSC. So where you have these series of hyphens, it basically means that there is no such text in the syllabus, no corresponding text in the syllabus in UPSC. Okay, then you have Shakespeare's Macbeth and As You Like It in WBCS, whereas UPSC has prescribed for you King Lear and The Tempest. John Donne Okay, there are the first three poems, as you can see, are common to both the exams. Canonization, Death Be Not Proud and The Good Morrow. Whereas UPSC has added two more poems for you, On His Mistress Going to Bed and The Relic. Now there's something about UPSC that you have lesser number of authors but more number of texts by each of those authors, whereas WBCS has more number of authors themselves, okay, but perhaps just one or two texts by each of them. So as you can see, WBCS has also prescribed for you Andrew Marvell, and this is To His Coy Mistress and the Garden, but UPSC has not included Marvell at all. Then we come to John Milton, and WBCS has Paradise Lost Book 1 and also Lycidas, whereas UPSC has included books 2, 4 and 9 also, apart from 1, from Paradise Lost. Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock, well, even I couldn't think of anything else that could be included in the syllabus. Then you come to William Wordsworth, Tintern Abbey, an ode on intimations of immortality, of course, which is common to both the exams. Apart from that, 7 other poems have been added by UPSC. 3 years she grew, she dwelt among untrodden ways, so these are your Lucy poems. Then Michael, Resolution and Independence, The World is Too Much with Us, Milton, Thou Shouldst Be Living at This Hour, Upon Westminster Bridge. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, not included by UPSC, like I said, lesser number of poets but more number of texts. But WBCS wants you to read Kubla Khan and Dejection and Ode. Okay. Alright, in the previous slide, I think if you slide down, you'll be able to see Shelley also. And remember that Shelley is not there in UPSC, but Shelley has been included in WBCS, and you have Ozymandias and Ode to the West Wind in the syllabus. Okay, Ozymandias and Ode to the West Wind. Okay, now John Keats, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode on a Grecian Urn, but again not included in UPSC. Tennyson, WBCS, you have to read Ulysses, The Lotus Eaters and Tithonus. As you know, these are extremely well-known poems by Tennyson. Whereas for UPSC, you have to read In Memoria. This is what he wrote in memory of his friend Arthur Henry Hallam. Again, Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, you have to read only for WBCS but not UPSC. So you see, there are several common points of preparation, but then when you read one poet, and if you feel that you can easily prepare for both the exams, that's not exactly going to happen, because you have different texts by the same author in each case. Okay, but then let me tell you that overall that's going to give you a better idea of the authors, and it may even help you in writing answers. So say if you are writing an answer on Tennyson in UPSC, and of course you are expected to write about In Memoriam, but there if you can give intertextual examples, meaning that if you can quote something relevant from Ulysses as well, then no harm done. It's actually better. You're displaying a better knowledge over there. Alright, then Ibsen, you do A Doll's House in UPSC, but there's no Ibsen in WBCS. Okay, now coming to some of the novelists. Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, UPSC has prescribed for you, but not WBCS. Again, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels has been prescribed only by UPSC, but not WBCS. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, on the other hand, you have to read only WBCS. Again, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, of course, what else? You have to read for both the exams. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, only for WBCS. George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss, only for UPSC. So you see, that's very little difference. I mean, UPSC wants you to read Eliot, whereas WBCS wants you to read Bronte. Although I don't know why Jane Eyre is not included in the syllabus at all. Charles Dickens, Great expectations for WBCS, hard times for UPSC. Similarly, Thomas Hardy, Mayor of Casterbridge for WBCS, Tess of the D'Urbervilles for UPSC. And any day you will see that Tess of the D'Urbervilles is a much superior text to Mayor of Casterbridge. Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn must be read very thoroughly. It's included in both the exams. Then you have W.B. Yeats's Easter 1916, Leda and the Swan, Sailing to Byzantium, common to both exams. Apart from that, 7 more poems in UPSC: Byzantium, The Second Coming, Prayer for My Daughter, Among School Children, Lapis Lazuli, Meru, and The Tower. If you did not have this list already, you can pause the video and note down comfortably. T.S. Eliot, interestingly common syllabus in this case, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, The Journey of the Magi, and Burnt Norton. And while I'm repeating the names that I've made a list of, I hope that those watching this video have like a rough idea of these texts already. I mean, this you would have, of course, if you are a student of literature, but if you are not a student of literature, then for you it's going to be a little difficult to follow all this right now. However, like I've said before, that does not mean that you cannot choose this as an optional, only you have to work harder. W.H. Audens, In Memory of W.B. Yeats, Lay Your Sleeping Head, My Love, and The Shield of Achilles, common to both exams. UPSC also wants you to read Musée des Beaux-Arts, Partition, Consider, Wonders at Infants, Petition, The Unknown Citizen, and September 1st, 1939. In case of Samuel Beckett, of course, and there could be no other alternative, you have to read Waiting for Godot. John Osborne also, of course, you must read Look Back in Anger. Otherwise, there's no way you can understand what the angry young men dramatists were all about. Now, WBCS has included very interesting set of authors here. Sylvia Plath, whose Mirror and Nick and the Candlestick you need to do. Derosio's To India, My Native Land and My Country. And Kamala Das's An Introduction. Whereas UPSC has included Philip Larkin and these 6 poems by him, Next, Please, Deceptions, Afternoons, Days, and Mr. Bleeny. And A.K. Ramanujan's Looking for Cousin on a Swing, A River of Mothers Among Other Things, Small Scale Reflections on a Great House, and Obituary. I'm sorry, the slide got forwarded a little quickly. And here's coming to the last section, and this is the prose section of the second paper in both cases. As you can see, UPSC wants you to study Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad, but not WBCS. D.H.S. Lawrence's The Rainbow has been included in WBCS, whereas Sons and Lovers in UPSC. A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf in WBCS. Mrs. Dalloway, on the other hand, in UPSC. A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce in both cases. Kantapura by Raja Rao in both cases. A Passage to India by E.M. Forster only in UPSC. Crisis in Civilization by Rabindranath Tagore in WBCS only. A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul in UPSC only. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, The Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh only in WBCS. Alright, so that was the syllabus in details. Now let's come to the pattern of the paper. See, section A, and these questions I've taken from the 2018 paper of WBCS. Okay, and they've given you as many as 5 options. You just have to choose one out of these 5, and it's for as much as 40 marks. So an essay on any one of the following topics, and this is what they meant by literary topics. A, the social value of literature. B, literature and film. C. Magic realism in literature. So you could talk about the likes of Marquez. D. The cultural value of biography and autobiography. E. The role of literary theory in reading literary texts. So this is what I meant. I mean, literary theory, a literature student would have read literary theory in detail in at least some point in his or her academic career. So literary theory might seem a little difficult initially to students who are not from a literature background. So what I mean is that a very thorough knowledge is needed. You can't just give a very a very vague idea in case of these questions. You need to substantiate each of these questions with examples so that the examiner gets the feeling that your level is at least of a graduate level. Okay, your knowledge of literature, English literature, is that of a, it is similar to the knowledge that a graduate in English literature would display. Okay, and say in case of literature and film, you could talk about adaptations, right? But anyway, there are options, so any one of these topics. Section B, which mostly has questions from poetry, and Section C, which has questions from prose. And you get 6 options in Section B and 5 options in Section C. You need to attempt 2 each from both the sections. And again, 40 marks for each question. So there you go, you had 40 earlier, now you have 120 plus 80, that makes it 200. And you know that that's what the entire paper is for. The first paper of the optional subject is for 200 marks. However, remember one thing, that this pattern need not be repeated every year. This was the pattern for the last 4-5 years, but then it doesn't mean that it is going to be retained next year as well. This is just a starting point for you. Paper 2 is similar, but then you have 4 questions instead of 5, and there are 50 marks each, so you can imagine 200 marks again. First is, so you have an unseen prose or verse or poetry section that's given, and you just need to evaluate it critically. Remember that even if by chance you know the poem in question, there is no need to mention that in the answer. Like the title of the poem or the poet, you're not expected to know that. Okay, so even if you do know it, there's no need to mention it, because what they want to check in this case is how much you are capable of a literary critical analysis. Okay, so you're provided with any passage randomly, and they want to check your analytical skills. Okay, and then in the other 3 sections, questions 2, 3 and 4, you have 4 options each. Okay, and the first section is on poetry, second one on poetry and plays, third one on prose, and you've got to answer 1 each from each of these three sections. Okay, like I said, this was the pattern last year and 2-3 years before that also, but then this may differ. UPSC paper pattern is slightly different, and very different actually, because there are shorter questions here. You saw how WBCS gives you an option, in fact, to leave out quite a few texts. If you are confident about, say, I don't know, 20-25 authors in the syllabus, that is sometimes enough, because you have a lot of options you can eliminate. But then let me warn you that that's only possible with the kind of pattern that you saw. If you suddenly get a paper tomorrow similar to how UPSC sets the paper, then it's not possible to eliminate authors. Okay, so UPSC paper is for 250 marks. Okay, so 250 into 2, 500 marks for the optional. And questions 1 and 5 are compulsory in both cases. Okay, and So you have 5 subdivisions there, A, B, C, D and E, and 10 marks for each subdivision. So that's 10 into 5, 50 in both cases. Okay, question 1 as also question 5. Question 1 is going to be on generic literary topics like the ones you saw over there in WBCS, or on specific texts. So it could be anything, the pattern is not fixed. So then they could either ask you about the characteristics of Elizabethan drama, or they could question you specifically on the tragic elements in Shakespeare's King Lear. Okay, and question 5 is going to be a critical evaluation of an unseen prose or poem. The difference with the second paper of WBCS being that, here you will be asked specific questions on that unseen prose or poetry passage. Okay, that is, you don't have a free hand here in writing whatever you wish to about that for 50 marks. You'll have 5 specific questions on that unseen part. Right, out of the rest of the questions, meaning questions 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 and 8, you have to attempt only 3, okay, and that's 50 marks each again. Choosing, however, at least 1 from each section, okay. So the paper is divided into 2 sections, 1, 2, 3 and 4 belong to section A, whereas 5, 6, 7 and 8 belong to section B. Now if you are doing 1 and 5, of course, because they are compulsory, then if you do 2 and 3 from section A, then you have to do 6 or 7 or 8 from section B, meaning that you cannot do 2, 3 and also 4, or 6, 7 and also 8. Okay, so you can do, say, questions 6 and 7, and then you have to do at least 2 or 3 or 4 from section A. Okay, now question 2, again, these are not long questions like in WBCS. Okay, there are subdivisions, and this is the marks breakup for you, either 15 plus 15 plus 20 or 20 plus 20 plus 10. Okay, but ultimately it's going to be 50 for each question. So you have the total there, 50 into 200 marks, that's the compulsory questions, and 50 into 3, 150 marks, those are the 3 optional questions, and that gives you the total of 250 marks. Thank you very much for listening to that lecture, and I'll begin with specific texts from the next lecture. And I'll start with Rajarau's Kanthapura, because that is something that's common to both WBCS and UPSC. If you have any doubts on whatever was discussed in this lecture, you can post it in the comment section. Thank you very much.